There are not many Russian urban legends. Not that we lack in imagination. I guess our minds are just usually occupied with more real horrors to conjure up something unreal. And yet there's a legend about a creature that dwells on the streets of Moscow. A thing that can only be met during the dead of night, and at first can be confused for a streetlight or a tree. Mostly due to how unusually long its limbs are. On the internet, it's known as Polochnik, or the Stickman in English. Don't be fooled. Despite having such a dull and uninspiring name, I think it's one of the most horrific urban legends, because unlike any other myths, this one is very much real. And I'm not saying it because I'm easily influenced by some scary internet stories. I've seen it with my very own eyes 10 years ago, long before other mentions of it started showing up on the web. Back then I was only 15, and I was still attending school. And I was one of the lucky ones, in that I lived with the same building as my friend. And you're probably thinking of one of those apartment blocks, but in reality it was, and still is, a large building in the form of a circle. As far as I know, it's the only one of that kind in the whole country. There was a large yard with a playground, pedestrian walks, and garages in the middle. He lived across the yard, and our windows overlooked it, so sometimes during the evening we'd pull out our laser pointers and play a game where we'd try and hit each other in the eye. The laser pointers were not powerful enough to create a beam that would cross the distance without dissipating, but we still liked to pretend that our game mattered. And of course we would often visit each other to play games on our old Pentiums, with one of us watching the other one play, hoping that he would fail soon, and it would be time to switch places on the desk. One spring evening I was watching some movie when my phone vibrated. Almost instinctively I knew it was him. We'd get in touch every day, and on that particular evening, he was still to reach out to me. I turned out to be correct. I had one new SMS message from him. I expected him to invite me over and suggest that we play Counter-Strike, but the message caught me off guard. Dude, look out the window right now. Confused, I did what he asked me to do. I could make out his faint silhouette in a familiar window across the street. I thought I saw him moving, waving his hands, but I couldn't make out exactly what he was trying to do. The phone vibrated again. Below, in the yard, do you see it? I looked down, but I didn't see anything worthy of attention. What was all the fuss about? What? I didn't see anything. I messaged him back. 30 seconds later, his reply arrived. There, by the garages, do you see him? This time I was determined to see what got him so worked up, so I squinted and started looking. The streetlights were already on, illuminating the street below with their unwashed yellow light bulbs, so I didn't see him immediately. Streetlights, garages, trees. The unfamiliar shape caught my eye. Looking out that window since my birth, I knew every inch of down below, so something new would not escape my gaze, even with the lights being so dim. I'm sure my friend noticed him due to precisely the same reaction. He was easy to miss, his long limbs and extremely thin stature making him look almost like a pole. Only it couldn't be a man, could it? I looked at the tree next to him to get a reference. There was no mistake. The mysterious figure was at least 3 meters tall. I see it. Dude, what is it? I asked, my imagination already going wild. While the childhood side of me wanted to be something very creepy, so that I could brag about it in school the next day, deep inside I knew that it couldn't be something alive. In my mind it was most likely some weird installation, and my mind was playing tricks on me, telling me that it was something humanoid. The message that arrived 30 seconds ago wiped that smile from my face. I don't know, man, but you should see it walking. I looked out the window again, and the figure was still there. Was my friend messing with me? The figure was in a slightly different position than before. Did you see it move? A new message asked me. No, it didn't, I wrote back. Then I saw it move. Despite how far away it was, it instantly became clear that it wasn't a person. Its movements were sharp, quick, and fluent at the same time. It wasn't just a step. It was like limbs simply transitioned from one state to another. Yet, even from the distance, I caught on how long and frail its legs were, and how abnormally it was shifting its weight. Finishing its movement, it froze in place again, completely immobile. I guess it really was trying to pretend to be a lamppost. My phone beeped again. "Did you see it? So cool. I'll go grab my dad's camera." Perhaps the reasonable thing would be to stop him, to tell him not to stick his neck out, but I was a kid, so I had different priorities. "Is it digital?" I typed into my phone, more concerned whether he'd be able to share the photos. I knew that it was something supernatural at that point, maybe even dangerous, but I was too high up in my apartment, gleeful about how awesome it would be to show the photo off of that thing in school the next day. How could I even fathom that despite the distance that it was between us, it could still pose a threat? How could I know that it could climb walls? I received another message from my friend. "Got it." I looked out the window and sure enough his silhouette was back there with a big professional camera in his hands, about to make the last photo in his life. Had he known how to operate the camera, he'd figured out that using the flash at such distance was pointless, but his father forbade him to even touch it, fearing that the boy might damage it by accident. And when he pushed the button, the mighty flash illuminated the entire yard. The creature reacted instantaneously, its head snapping back to look where the flash was coming from. Then it started walking backward towards my friend, its head still turned 180 degrees. Its knees were flying high up in the air and its body turned around like it was walking, only the limbs did, one at a time, without interrupting the creature's pace for a movement. My friend's silhouette disappeared. No doubt he hid from the creature, alerted to its approach. I got a message full on panic from him. "Oh shit, I think it saw me." The creature was getting taller with each step. Its legs stretched out and each step was longer than the last. It was picking up the pace, walking as fast as possible without breaking into a run. When it approached the wall, it grabbed it with its two hands, and then in one short leap lifted itself out with unnatural ease and started crawling upwards, like some four-legged spider. It seemed like gravity didn't bother in the slightest. I'm in my closet, is it still there?" was the last message my friend sent me before it crawled through his window. I could only see its shadows as it started quickly moving inside his room. I didn't know what it was doing to him. To this day, nobody does. I only know that by the time it was finished, my friend was gone. I remember suddenly recognising its silhouette in the square of his window. I could clearly see it pick something up off the floor. Then it turned its head in my direction, and I fell to the floor, hiding from its sight. "It's got his phone," I thought in a panic. Surely it couldn't know how to use it though, right? It couldn't see that my friend was discussing it with someone. But when I carefully peeked out, the creature wasn't in my friend's room anymore. It was already striding in my direction. The creature gained an unsightly bloated sack under its stomach that was shaking when it was moving. I fell to my knees and quickly crawled out of the room, locking myself in the bathroom. In my panic, I didn't think to call my parents, who were sitting in another room watching some sitcoms. I simply couldn't see how they could help in this situation. I spent there a good hour before my father decided to check up on me, and upon entering my room started angrily demanding that I come out of the bathroom and clear this mess in my room. When I stepped inside, the realization of what had transpired finally surfaced through the shock, and I started crying in fear. My father comforted me, but he was very confused. He couldn't understand why my window was open and all the contents of my closets were on the floor. But to me, there was no doubt about it. If I'd stayed in the room, if I'd hidden the closet like my friend had, there would be 2 missing persons cases. My friend's body was never found, but I did find out that there was other people like me. The other people on the internet saw it too. There were photos 1 and 2, and even videos. So I know that it's probably still out there, looking for its next meal, and probably looking for me. So I'll have to be ready. To this day, I avoid lampposts and tall trees at night. To this day, I fear that I might not wake up. And to this day, despite living on the 11th floor, whenever I look out the window, I still fear to see its blank face. When I was about 12, my great uncle John came from Ukraine to visit us in Canada. He had a lot of stories, but this was the one that stood out the most. In the late 1960s, John was travelling by train from his village to another to visit family. He had to change trains at one point and was dropped off at what amounted to be a platform and a hut in the middle of nowhere. There was no one else at the station, and other than a dirt road that led off into the surrounding woods, there was nothing there at all. He waited for some time, but no train came. It was winter and getting colder and darker, and just about the time he started worrying about a place to stay and some food to eat, an old woman appeared out of the twilight. She asked if he was waiting for such a train, and when he said he was, she said it wouldn't be long until the following day. She asked if he needed a bed for the night and offered him a meal in a room at her house, which she said was about an hour's walk from the station. Lodging with locals was more or less a standard when travelling in this part of the USSR, and Great Uncle John wasn't looking forward to a hungry night on a cold platform, so he was glad to accept her offer. She took his suitcase and they set off together down the dark road into the forest. It was more than an hour away, more like 2. And by the time they arrived at the woman's small 2-story house, John was tired and hungry. They went inside and the woman lit some oil lamps and warmed some borsch for them. It was the first time John was able to see the woman clearly, and he was a bit startled to realise that the old woman was actually a man. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, John finished his soup and asked where he would be sleeping. She led him up the stairs to a tiny room with a window that contained a single bed and nothing else. He thanked her, they said goodnight, and she closed the door. Then she locked it, leaving him in the dark. Somewhat creeped out by this, John called to her, but she didn't answer, and he heard nothing else. Figuring he would deal with it in the morning, and that she had probably done it by mistake, John set his suitcase down and laid on the bed, deciding to make the best of it and get some sleep. Before he could fall asleep though, he felt the urge to pee and got out of bed, hoping to find a chamber pot or something that he could pee in. He got onto his hands and knees and began to feel under the bed in the darkness, thinking that's where the pot would be if there was one. Instead, he found a body. "Nope," Great Uncle John said, and went right to the window to see if he could exit the room that way. It was nailed shut. He knew that if he remained in the room, he was probably a dead man, but if he broke the window and tried to get out, there was a good chance that the old woman, and who knows what else was there, would hear him and come into the room before he could get away. So he did the only thing he could do. He pulled the body from under the bed, heaved it onto the mattress, and covered it with a blanket. Then he got under the bed and waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, he heard footsteps coming slowly up the stairs and towards the room. The lock clicked and the knob turned slowly. In the gloom, John saw someone moving towards the bed. Then he heard several terrific and sickening thuds. The person had bashed on the body with a large crowbar, which they then dropped onto the floor right in front of John. There was silence. Then the person went out of the room and the door was shut again. The footsteps then went down the stairs and there was silence again. John moved out from under the bed, took the crowbar and was able to pry the window open. He didn't say, but I imagine he was shitting bricks the entire time. When the window was up, he threw his suitcase out and then dove through himself, not caring what lay below him, only worried about what was behind. He landed without too much injury and began to run into a field behind the house, towards some lights in the far distance. It turned out to be a highway with some military and transport trucks on it, and John was able to get a ride to another village where he could catch a train. He didn't bother reporting what happened to the authorities, since at that time in the USSR, there was a distinct chance he would have been the only one who got into trouble. He just thanked God he escaped and decided that next time he travelled to visit his relatives, he would take another way. I'll start this story with a trigger warning. My friend and I contributed to this dangerous situation by putting ourselves in places we probably should have stayed away from. So keep in mind, we didn't always do the thing that we should have, didn't always listen to common sense, and we could have been a little bit more intelligent in certain instances. That's life sometimes, and retrospect is always 2020. This happened several years ago, right around the time when the wild party era of our early 20s was winding down into the chill get-togethers of our late 20s. I was at a party hanging out with some good friends and my sisters. We were having some fun drinking, playing guitar and talking. Important people to this story are Peter and Kyle. Kyle was an old friend, and Peter was a newer friend of about 3 years that I'd been hanging out with a lot. Peter and I decided to grab a few beers and walk to the close-by elementary school and climb around on the monkey bars and talk. It was around 9 to 10 p.m. at this point. I know it might seem like kind of a silly notion, but sometimes it's fun to play on the equipment and feel like a little kid again. And the alcohol helps. Or maybe it's just a place to get away from what you don't expect to see. Either way, we wanted a good place to walk to, and the school seemed like a good idea. We grabbed a few beers and started walking. We hopped the fence and started approaching to the side of the building that would take us to the back side of the building and subsequently the park. The front of the building had some lights on, but the side was mostly dark. There was a metal railing and a slightly platformed sidewalk that followed to the side of the building. A lot of schools, in my experience at least, seem to have something like this. About halfway into the side of the building, there was an indent of which the platform, sidewalk and railing followed. So if you can imagine, the first half of the building had a little light on the front, but when the path curved to the left to match the indent of the building, it left only darkness. As we approached the left turn in the walkway, we talked about nothing in particular. At this point, I didn't get that cliche feeling of unease. We just kept going. The second we turned the corner, we see two figures in the shadows just looking at us. We recoiled in shock, probably saying something along the lines of, "Oh shit," or "What the hell?" They seemed a little surprised as well, but they knew we were coming. They had the advantage of hearing us from likely at least a few hundred feet away. They must have been silent at the first moment they heard us, because we had no indication that there was anyone round the corner. After the initial shock and both parties realising that the other wasn't, at least for the present moment, posing any danger to each other, we relaxed a bit and said hi. We learned that they had a similar idea as we did, and were drinking at the school. Instead of choosing the park, however, they chose this little corner, likely thinking it would keep them hidden, and it clearly worked. Also, unlike us, the school was an all-night event, hence the handle of vodka on the ground near them. I'll take a moment to describe these two people. The male was approximately 5'10", skinny and couldn't have been much older than 18. He wore a torn metal shirt, which is actually fairly important to the story. The girl was about 5'4"-ish, a little plump, and had that goth punk look. Now at this point, the initial shock of the unexpected duo had worn off, but I was still a little bit uneasy. I kind of wanted to turn around and walk back to the house, but my friend was talking to the guy, and we were chatting in what seemed like an amiable way. So I decided to just chill for a bit and see where this goes. After all, this could be one of those funny stories where you have a good time with complete strangers in an entirely unexpected scenario and maybe meet a new friend. Spoiler alert, this is the polar opposite of that kind of story. I can't tell you the total duration of the time we spent there, but I'm going to estimate it was about 45 minutes, give or take. As the minutes filled the hourglass, the vodka in the bottle dwindled away. I was gingerly sipping my beer, not sure what to expect from the night, and wanted to stay alert. As the vodka receded in the bottle, red flags started to pop up left and right. The last one below brought tension to the maximum, far exceeding the initial shock of running into this strange duo. The girl was telling me that she was related to the Jeffrey Dahmer, the cannibal serial killer. She said this in a proud kind of way, like she was bragging about a famous relative. It's entirely possible she was lying and telling me this to scare me or seem edgy. But either way, it was a weird thing to brag about. The guy's reason for downing the vodka was because of his Russian descent. He thought he was Russian. He not only had to drink vodka, but he had to drink copious amounts of it quickly. At some point, he had some kind of techno music playing on his phone, and he got uncomfortably close to my friend Peter and danced in front of him. There was no invitation. There was no, hey, check out my sweet dance moves. Just dancing in his face while Peter stood there uncomfortably and watched. And I should point out this wasn't really what I, or anyone likely for that matter, would consider dancing. It looked more like the initial reaction of someone being set on fire, but on a loop. Lots of rapid fist movements in random directions and rapid leg movements. Peter and I uncomfortably looked at each other, mutually exchanging the "what the fuck" expression. I think we both knew that about this time we should probably leave. The final instance brought the tension up to the potentially dangerous level. It was about my t-shirt I was wearing. I was wearing a button-up shirt, nothing fancy. More like the kind of shirt you'd wear to a friend's birthday dinner, or a mid-tier nice restaurant, less the dress shirt you'd wear to that same friend's wedding. What can I say, similar to the crazy Russians, this made-up friend is picky about shirts. By the way, the shirt was way too nice for this crazy Russian, and in his eyes, it must have made me a desperate douche. He started telling me I'd never get girls with a shirt like that, and I just brushed him off. Okay, I've done reasonably well in the department, but thanks for the advice. He even said to me, I kid you not, I should take you to the mall with me and I'll show you how to get girls. I mean, do I really need to comment on that statement? It says it all right there. Then it started escalating to the point where this kid was in my face and trying to fight me. And by this time he was pretty trashed. Very well could have thrown a punch at any moment. I had my fists clenched by my side and very seriously considered throwing the first punch, giving my friend and I enough time to get the hell out of there. But somehow I de-escalated the situation and he stood down. But at this point this tension was still high and the feeling was very ominous. Thank God, right? Around this point my friend Kyle and my sister showed up looking for us. We walked back to the house with a strange duo not far behind us. I talked to Kyle ahead and briefly explained the weirdness for the last 45 minutes while Peter stayed behind and talked to the strange duo. It's important to state that regardless of all the weirdness of the night, the crazy Russian only had a real problem with me. My friend's shirt must have been just the right level of not nice, that it didn't even ping the crazy Russian's radar and trigger his anger against moderately nice shirts. So Peter walked behind, talking with the strange duo, further trying to diffuse whatever tension was left, and just being a genuinely nice guy. Me, however, walking ahead and whispering to Kyle must have fueled some kind of paranoia that we were talking smack to the strange duo, which we totally were. I wish I could end right here with the old crazy Russian and cannibal girl let's not meet, but unfortunately the night gets much worse. Eventually the strange duo walked back the way they came, and we hung out in the front yard for a few moments, talking about what had happened. I recounted all the weirdness, which at the time included much more detail, for about 15 minutes. We went inside, hung out for a while, and let the recent events kind of drift away. The plan was to get this train back on the rails and have a good night. At some point, Peter asked me not to go outside and have a smoke with him. I know, I need to stop hanging out with Peter alone at night in the front yard. The layout of the yard is very important to this next part. When you walk out the front door, the garage and driveway is almost immediately to your left. The garage protrudes about 5 feet or so from the front door, and there was a truck in the driveway, and the plan was to chill by the tailgate and have a cigarette. I walked along the right side of the car to the driver's side, whilst my friend walked in between the garage and the hood of the car to go around to the left side. As he's nearing the left side of the hood, I hear him yell, "Oh, hi," in a shocked but not altogether unfriendly way. I look over and see him standing there and the crazy Russian standing in front of him. This all happened in the matter of a second, but it seemed like a minute. They both stood there for a moment. You could see the crazy Russian studying Peter's face for a split second before his fist went up and he hit Peter right in the temple. Peter hit the car, then the garage, and went down. Thank God the garage was there to dampen the fall a little bit. And then the strange duo took off down the street. I wish my first reaction was to check on my friend, but I ran after the crazy Russian. After all, the punch was clearly meant for me, not Peter, who had been nothing but nice the whole time, so I couldn't let the crazy Russian get away with it. And the way he was sloppily running, he was clearly drunk, and I wouldn't have too much trouble catching him. Right around this time, my sisters and Kyle came outside hearing the ruckus. They checked on Peter whilst I chased the strange duo. I caught up to the crazy Russian and punched him several times, getting him in the back of the head and the cheek. Eventually he was able to get away and ran off. I didn't even chase him at that point. I felt I'd got equal vengeance and then some. My friend was delirious, not quite sure what year it was, and there was blood dripping everywhere. He didn't know who the president was, which he humorously pronounced as Obama. We brought him to the shower and cleaned him up, got him dried off, and eventually determined that we had to bring him to the hospital. He turned out to be fine, and we eventually left the hospital around 6 in the morning, went to my apartment and finally got some rest. It was apparent that they had followed us back without us seeing them, and had hidden behind the car, listening to us talk about them. That must have really pissed them off. The really creepy thing is that they must have stayed there for another 30 to 60 minutes, just waiting. The thing that scares me the most, other than the fact that my friend could have been seriously injured, is that one of my sisters could have walked out there. In the strange duo state, they seem to have no problem attacking indiscriminately. So, crazy Russian and cannibal girl, let's not meet.